I found out my husband was having an affair on the same night. His mistress's husband found out too. Strange, isn't it? Two marriages collapsing under the same roof of lies, on the exact same evening, neither of us knowing the other existed. I found the messages on his phone while he was in the shower, 3 years of them, hidden behind a password I finally guessed on my worst night, when something in my gut just told me to try our anniversary date backwards. And 40 minutes away, in a house I'd never seen, a man named Daniel Reyes was staring at the same woman's name on a different screen, feeling the same floor disappear beneath him. My name is Claire Whitfield. I was 34 years old, married for 9 years, and until that Tuesday night, I genuinely believed, that my husband Mark loved me. I want to tell you what betrayal actually feels like, because nobody prepares you for it. It isn't loud. It isn't a scream. It's quiet. It's your hands going cold while your face stays completely still, because some ancient part of you already knows that the moment you react, the illusion breaks forever, and you are not ready, you will never be ready for that. I sat on the edge of our bed with his phone in my lap, and I read messages between my husband and a woman named Renee Castellano. Sweetheart, baby, I miss your hands. Things he used to say to me once a long time ago, back when he still meant them. The water shut off in the bathroom. I remember thinking, absurdly, that I still had time to put the phone back and pretend. 9 years of marriage teaches you how to swallow things. I almost did it. I almost chose the easier lie. But then I thought about our wedding day, the way he'd actually cried, when I walked toward him, and something in me just broke open instead of closing shut. "Who is Renee?" I asked, when he walked out in his towel, steam still clinging to his shoulders. He didn't even flinch at first. That's the part that still haunts me, how smooth he was, how practiced. "Renee who?" he said, reaching for his shirt like I'd asked him something about the weather. I held up the phone. I watched 34 years of trust leave his face and get replaced by something colder, calculation. Not guilt, calculation. He was already working out what he could still salvage. "It's not what it looks like," he said, the oldest sentence in the world. I laughed. I actually laughed, this broken, ugly sound I didn't recognize as mine. "It's exactly what it looks like, Mark. I can read." He tried denial for maybe 90 seconds before he gave up and switched to something worse. He tried to make it my fault. Said I'd been distant. Said I worked too much. Said Renee understood him in ways I hadn't in years. I want you to understand something about me before I go further into this story. I am not a woman who screams. I did not throw anything. I did not cry in front of him, though God knows I wanted to. I went quiet instead, the kind of quiet that scares people more than shouting ever could, because he could see I was doing math behind my eyes, and he had no idea what the answer was going to be. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that at that exact hour, Renee Castellano was standing in her own kitchen, watching her husband Daniel hold up her phone the same way I'd held up Mark's. I only learned this part later, of course, pieced together afterward like most true stories are. But I think about it constantly, the symmetry of it, the cruelty of it. 2 houses, 2 marriages, one woman at the center of both collapses, and neither man saying a word to warn the other that their secret had a shelf life measured in hours. Daniel Reyes was 41, an engineer quiet by nature, the kind of man who fixed things instead of talking about them. He'd suspected for months, apparently, the late nights, the phone always face down, the way Renee had started flinching whenever he touched her, like guilt had rewired her skin. He hired someone to look into it. Cheap, he told me later. Didn't feel proud of it. But he needed proof his own mind could hold on to, because suspicion alone was eating him from the inside. He got his proof 3 days before I got mine. He just hadn't confronted her yet. He was still deciding how, still turning it over like a stone in his pocket, still hoping, the way we always hope, right up until the last second, that there was some explanation that didn't end his marriage. My confrontation forced his hand, because the night I found out, I didn't just yell at Mark. I did something colder. I texted Renee directly. "I hope you know what you've done to my family," I wrote. "I hope it was worth it." I didn't expect a reply. I certainly didn't expect what happened next, my phone ringing 20 minutes later, An unknown number, a man's voice, low and steady and strangely calm for someone whose entire world had just cracked open too. "Is this Claire?" he asked. "My name is Daniel Reyes. I think our spouses have been lying to both of us." There's a particular kind of silence that happens when two strangers realize they've been living the same nightmare from opposite ends. I remember gripping the phone so hard my knuckles ached. I remember sitting down on my kitchen floor, back against the cabinets, because my legs simply stopped being reliable. We talked for 2 hours that night. Two strangers, trading timelines like detectives, filling in each other's blank spaces. He told me about the hotel receipts. I told him about the messages. Somewhere around midnight, we stopped being strangers and started being something else. Two people standing in the wreckage of the same betrayal, finally able to say out loud the things we couldn't say to the people who'd caused it. "I keep thinking about what I did wrong," I admitted to him, my voice cracking for the first time all night. "Isn't that insane? He's the one who lied, and I'm the one lying awake wondering if I wasn't enough." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "I do the same thing," he said finally. "I keep replaying every dinner where she seemed far away, wondering if I should have noticed sooner, wondering if noticing sooner would have even changed anything." I didn't know yet that this conversation was the first stone in a bridge I would later walk across, toward something I never saw coming, something that would complicate everything I thought I understood about grief, about anger, about what a person is capable of when they've been broken open. Because 3 weeks later, standing in a coffee shop that smelled like cinnamon and rain, Daniel Reyes would look at me with an expression I hadn't seen directed at me in years. Not pity, not desperation, just quiet, steady attention. And he would ask me to marry him. And I would say yes. Not for love, not yet. I want to be honest with you about that because this isn't a fairy tale, and I'm not going to pretend it started as one. I said yes because somewhere in my shattered, furious heart, I had already decided that if Mark and Renee wanted each other so badly, they were going to watch what happened when the two people they betrayed stopped being victims and started being something they never expected. I said yes to get close enough to make them feel exactly what they'd made us feel. I had no idea, not even a little, how far that decision would carry me, or what it would cost me before the truth finally came all the way to the surface. I want to tell you the truth about revenge, the real truth, not the satisfying movie version. Revenge doesn't feel like winning, not at first. It feels like carrying a stone in your chest that you keep sharpening instead of setting down. The weeks after that call with Daniel moved strangely, like time itself had gotten confused about what season we were in. Mark moved out, or rather, I told him to leave, and he did, with the kind of wounded indignation that made me want to laugh and scream at the same time, as if I were the one who'd broken something sacred. He took his clothes, his golf clubs, half our framed photographs, like even our memories needed to be divided into his and hers. "You're really going to throw away 9 years over this?" he asked me, standing in the doorway with a box under his arm. "You threw it away," I said. "I'm just the one carrying out the trash." He didn't have a response for that. I remember feeling, for one brief and vicious second, something close to pride. Daniel and I kept talking. What started as two strangers comparing wounds slowly became something else. Long phone calls that stretched past midnight, coffee that turned into dinner that turned into him showing up outside my apartment with soup because I'd mentioned offhand that I hadn't eaten properly in 3 days. He never pushed. That was the thing about Daniel that I hadn't expected. He had this patience that felt almost foreign to me, like a language I was slowly learning to understand. "You don't have to perform being okay around me," he told me once, when I'd tried to laugh off a bad day. "I know what this feels like. You don't have to pretend with someone who's standing in the same wreckage." I cried in front of him for the first time that night. Really cried, the ugly, gasping kind I'd refused to give Mark. And Daniel just sat there, not touching me, not trying to fix it, just present, like a lighthouse that doesn't stop the storm, but at least gives you something to see by. I told myself, even then, that this was strategy, that I was building something I could use. I told myself Renee would eventually hear about us. Small towns and shared social circles guarantee that kind of thing. And when she did, I wanted her to feel the exact hollow, sick shock I'd felt reading those messages. It worked faster than I expected. Renee showed up at my office on a Thursday afternoon, mascara already smudged before she even opened her mouth. I hadn't seen her in person before, only photos, the kind you stare at too long, memorizing the face of the woman who held pieces of your husband you thought were only yours. She was younger than me, prettier, in the conventional way people mean when they say that, though standing in front of her I mostly just felt tired. "Is it true?" she asked, voice shaking. "You and Daniel, people are saying you're engaged." "We are," I said. Something in her face folded inward. "You don't even like him. You're doing this to hurt me." I let that sit in the air a moment before I answered, because I wanted her to feel the silence the way I'd felt it that night on my bedroom floor. "Does it matter why?" I said. "If it's working." She left in tears. I want to tell you I felt triumphant. I didn't. I felt hollow, like I'd swallowed something jagged and it was still working its way down. That night, Daniel came over and I told him everything. The real reason I'd said yes. The plan I'd been carrying since that first phone call. The ugly, small satisfaction I'd felt watching Renee's face crumble. I was certain, absolutely certain, that once I confessed it, he'd walk away. Part of me wanted him to. It would have been easier than what came next. He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I started rehearsing an apology. "I knew," he said finally. I stared at him. "What?" "Claire, I'm not naive. I knew from that first phone call that some part of this was about them, not us. I could hear it in your voice." He looked down at his hands, then back up at me, steady in that way that had become, without my noticing, something I relied on. I kept saying yes to dinner anyway, kept showing up anyway, because somewhere around the third week, it stopped being about Renee for me. I wasn't sticking around to win some war against her. I was sticking around because I liked who I was becoming when I was with you. I didn't know what to do with that. Nobody had said anything like that to me in years, maybe ever, not really, not with that particular kind of unguarded honesty. "I used you," I said, because it needed to be said out loud, ugly and plain. "Maybe at the start," he agreed. "I'm asking if you still are." I sat with that question for a long time after he left that night. Longer than I'd sat with almost anything since this whole nightmare began. And when I finally answered it, honestly, in the dark of my apartment with nobody there to perform for, the answer surprised me. I wasn't using him anymore. Somewhere between the soup and the soft, unwavering way he looked at me even when I was at my worst, this had become real. Not because I'd planned it. Because I'd let myself, finally, stop performing revenge long enough to actually feel something true. Mark found out about the engagement the way he found out about most things, too late, and from someone else. He called me, furious, demanding to know how I could move on so fast, as if betrayal came with an expiration date on my grief, but not on his freedom to have caused it. "You don't get to be angry about this," I told him, calmer than I'd ever managed to be with him before. "You don't get to set the terms of how I heal, Mark. You lost that right the night I found her name on your phone." He didn't have an answer for that either. It seemed to be a pattern with him, plenty of confidence for causing pain, none at all for facing its consequences. Daniel and I married the following spring, in a small ceremony with maybe 30 people, nothing like the enormous wedding I'd had with Mark. No string quartet, no 5-tier cake, nothing performed for an audience. Just people who actually loved us, and vows that felt, for the first time in my adult life, completely honest. "I'm not marrying you to prove anything to anyone," I told him, the morning of the wedding, my hands trembling slightly as I fixed his collar. "I need you to know that. This isn't the ending of my revenge story anymore. This is just my life, the one I actually want." "I know," he said, and he smiled the way he always did, quiet and certain, like a man who'd never once doubted this would be where we ended up. "I've known for a while, Claire. I was just waiting for you to catch up." Renee and Mark stayed together, for what it's worth, married about a year later in a ceremony I heard about secondhand and felt absolutely nothing about, which surprised me more than any revenge fantasy ever could have satisfied me. I used to think I needed to see them suffer to feel whole again. I was wrong. I healed anyway, indifference and all, and it turned out indifference was so much lighter to carry than hatred had ever been. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that first phone call with Daniel, two strangers sitting in the wreckage of the same lie, neither of us knowing what we'd become to each other. I think about how close I came to using him only as a weapon, and how grateful I am, every single day, that somewhere along the way, he became something else entirely, not a revenge story, but a rescue neither of us saw coming. People ask me sometimes if I regret how it all started, the anger, the strategy, the ugliness of my first real motives. I tell them the truth. I don't regret it because it led me here. But I also tell them this: real love was never the plan. It was just what was waiting on the other side of the pain, patiently, for as long as it took me to stop fighting long enough to notice it. And I did notice, eventually, and I have never once looked back.